right. Welcome to the No Jerry Podcast, episode 3, week 3, weekly podcast by Americans for Americans. We focus on what matters to you as you chase the American dream. Make sure to join our community on X, YouTube, Kick, Twitch, and TikTok. What are we getting in today?
Oh, man, we're going to jump into a bunch of different things today. We got the Super Bowl and the halftime show. It was a good one, I think, but we'll get into that. Trump stopping men and women's sports, which that just sounds like it doesn't make any sense out the gate. Should have never been a thing. Trump seeks information into assassination attempts, and that's going to be a sticky situation that it already was to begin with. USAID and FEMA wasting tax dollars, and also the Department of Education shut down for review.
Nice. So yeah, the Super Bowl was pretty good, man. I know it was a blowout and a lot of people didn't enjoy it, but hardcore football fans definitely enjoyed seeing the Chiefs get belt to butt on that one.
Yeah, man, that was crazy, honestly. I mean, the Chiefs were due. They were due for a loss, and they were due for one in a big way. Not to already get into that, but I mean, people have been saying all season that the Chiefs been getting carried by the referees. Yeah, they got a good defense. Yeah, they got a couple stars on offense. But at the end of the day, they've been getting all the calls left and right. And, they couldn't do that in the biggest stage in sports when all eyes were on them. So we seen what happened when the calls didn't go their way 100% of the time.
Yeah, I agree. And dude, that game, I remember going into it, everybody was like, the Eagles are a good team. They're the best on paper, one of the best teams in the league, if not the best. But it's Patrick Mahomes. And you always had to play that. In fact, people were talking about it all year with the Chiefs. And then you look at the games this year that they just barely won. And it was like, probably the worst number one seed in some recent years. But anyways, yeah, like you said, not to get into that. How about that halftime show, though? I mean, the consensus was it's the worst one ever. What do you think?
I think that consensus depends on what age group you're doing your consensus on, because people in our generation, it seems, loved it, but it seems like all the old heads are the ones that are like, oh, it's the worst halftime show ever. But come on, bro. They just have never even heard a Kendrick song before this halftime show, so that's why they don't like it.
Yeah, they want an 80-year-old guitarist up there getting ready to croak over. And don't get me wrong, I love old rock, but I mean, we need to get with the times. And that was a big thing too, is Kendrick's album. Like, he played a lot of the stuff from his new album, and like younger people who know about the beef between him and Drake know about the lyrics and also the symbolism behind all that. That was something where people who have no idea who he is automatically was ready to view it as completely terrible from the get-go, not even giving it a chance. I thought it was one of the best, recency bias probably, but to say it's the worst, it's like, I don't know about that.
Right. I think at the end of the day, the people that are saying that the worst, like we said, was the old heads, and it's people that don't know Kendrick music to begin with. And you would think with him winning so many Grammys and being such an awarded artist that there would be a lot more people that know of him. I mean, it's just the times. The people that I seen that were talking shit were not people that would be with the times and people that would know of Kendrick. So it makes sense.
Me they don't know nothing about rap music?
That's essentially exactly what I'm telling you. If it ain't Tupac or Biggie, they don't want it.
Yeah, and I think that's funny too. People just can't appreciate the art for what it is, and just automatically just want to become experts and criticize it. I mean, I feel like that happens with so many things when it comes to new movies that people get hyped up about. There's a bigger crowd of people that's like, oh, it's so hyped, I'm gonna find everything negative about it. I mean, there's negative Nancy's out there.
Right, and at the end of the day, like you said, the art of it, I feel like nobody's even talking about the fact that he shied away from the traditional halftime shows that we see with the big fireworks and the explosions and the different people left and right. He stuck to the art and made it about the music, which I think people should be able to appreciate that in itself. It was actually about the music. It was about his lyrics. And anybody that say that they couldn't understand him, I mean, I think he spoke clearly enough. I could very well understand him. So I think it's just a poor argument overall. And I think it's just people not with the times, and they're going to get left in the dust anyway. So we'll see what those same people are talking about AI in 2 years.
Yeah. And people just aren't, like, what's the quote I always hear? If you don't get with it, you'll get left behind.
Right, and that generation made that quote, bro. That's what's so crazy. That generation is the ones that were saying that, and then look at them now.
Yep. People reacted the same way to computers, to the .com craze. People didn't think the internet would be as big as it is now. People didn't think cell phones would be as big as they are now. And people, theorized about it back then, but now it's starting to actually become prominent. Yeah, man, overall it was a good game. I know it was a blowout, but I think it was probably the best blowout in the history of blowouts. It was nice to see the Chiefs defense commit to stop Saquon, which is basically what people thought they were all going to do, is just run the ball, run the ball, run the ball. Rightfully so, with a 2,000-yard rusher like Saquon. But he was actually bottled up pretty much the whole game, and it really forced Jalen to put the game on his back, and he did. He shined. Other than that interception, which was a complete mishap by the low lineman to miss the blitzer up the middle, and he couldn't step into that throw that was intercepted. Other than that, I mean, just hats off. I think he finished with 77 or 74% completion percentage, so hats off to him. I remember watching the NCAA championship with my grandpa a couple years ago when he got benched for Tua Tagovailoa, and just remember thinking then, like, man, like that's gotta suck. And he was still on the sideline just cheering Tua on, being a good teammate, and that just really showed his character. So to see him win MVP, I think it was pretty cool to watch. Even if it was a blowout, I stayed to watch just to see the interviews and see the reaction and to see the Chiefs mad, which is why I stayed tuned. But we
Yeah,
can
bro,
start to go ahead.
just to
Yeah, bro.
also touch on that game, how you said at the beginning that statistically and, pound for pound, the Eagles are the best team. But like you said, you always got to keep Pat Mahomes in mind. And Patrick Mahomes played his ass off, dude. I mean, he couldn't have done much more with how much pressure they were getting. But also to give props to Philadelphia, dude. I mean, they went crazy. Their O line is insane. The
Yeah.
Chiefs have a great defensive line, but watching that game, you couldn't tell with how good the Philly O line was playing. So I mean, they were giving Jalen Hurts days in the pocket, dude. He was just wandering around back there waiting for somebody to get open. And the Chiefs O line was the complete opposite. So I feel like that was the unsung real make or break in that game right there, was the play by the O lines. Philadelphia's was absolutely elite, and Kansas City's O line got shredded. And that pretty much made and break that whole game.
Yeah, man. The Super Bowls and championships are won in the trenches, and to see the Eagles D line only need to rush four and barely blitz the whole game, and still being able to just put Pat Mahomes in a blender, like it's a crazy thing because defense is still to this day, no matter how much firepower there is, defenses are still winning championships. So that's a beautiful thing. But that's enough football. You know, this is a World News channel. We got other avenues to speak about football. But with this, go ahead. I think some of the more recent news the last 2 weeks. So Trump did put an emphasis in signing an executive bill that prevented men from performing in all women's sports across the country, something that is supposed to be followed by the NCAA, if I'm not mistaken, probably already has. What's your thoughts on that?
It's crazy to me that in 2025, this is a conversation that we're having to have. It seems it's really the last 4 years, conversations like that have been popping off way more than they should. This one specifically, I mean, I think it comes down to a very simple thing. If you're born with one genitalia, you play in that league. If you're born with another genitalia, you play in that league. And that's just what it is. And like I said, it's crazy we're having to talk about it, but we do. And the argument's going to be that, that's not technically a man anymore. They've taken all these blockers and this and that. It's like, no, brother, it doesn't change that much. You see it like, I mean, in what was it? Was it Leah Thomas? Was that the swimmer? Dude,
I know you're talking about.
yeah, that person was massive, bro. I mean, way bigger than any other woman that was in the competition, and that's all you need to know. I mean, it just shows right there, and that's just one example, and there's been multiple more, and every time it's not like it's even close, dude. So,
Yeah, you know what's crazy about that is you always hear about transgender men wanting to be in women's sports, but you never hear about transgender women wanting to be in men's sports.
I wonder why that is. The proof's in the pudding, buddy.
I mean, I heard that on a channel. That floored me because I mean that's a logical question to ask, and it's simple. There's one thing I was telling my family members is, I have a daughter, and to think that, growing up, she actually does commit herself to a sport. And, I'm an advocate that I'm not going to push her in any certain sport. I'll give her the tools that she needs, and if she wants to commit, she can. And, if she came to me and she was like, I want to be the best in this, or I want to be the best in that, and we put the resources into her, and we put the time and the devotion and the emotion and everything, and then to come up short because you get to the biggest stage of it all, no matter what it is, for example, a championship cyclist, a cycling race, and the winner of it is a transgender male, and he won by lapping all the racers of girls in the race. And just imagine to bring your daughter up to that stage and her lose, come in second place to that, and the winner, who biologically is a man, lapped all the participants in the race, and then they're getting basically enshrined as being so strong and fighting adversity. It's just a slap to the face. And this is a real win for parents, a real win for all girls in sports. And you've seen that with the picture of Trump, and that's a historical photo of all them female athletes surrounding them. And you got, compilation videos of Joe Biden sniffing little girls' hairs and stuff. It's like, this is what matters, is to protecting the little kids, protecting the little girls especially, because they're the most vulnerable.
100%, man. I just have to agree with that 100%. This is something, it's like at the end of the day, it's not something that we should be talking about, because if you're going to make that decision that you're going to change, I guess, then you just have to hang it up in sports. Like, if that's what you're going to do, okay, that's your right to do what you want to do with your body. But if that's what you're going to do, you're going to hang it up. You're not going to change and then go play sports with the other gender. Like, that just doesn't even make sense. It shouldn't have been a thing ever. And I'm glad that they've put the legislation in place now to make sure that that's not something we have to worry about.
Yeah, and the people advocating for this to be okay is the same people that essentially want to take away women's rights. And like, I get, and I know this is like a huge talking point that Democrats use against Republicans in terms of abortion. But I mean, as in my work field, I go across a lot of gas station bathrooms, a lot of different bathrooms, and I came across one gas station where they had taken out the women's restroom, made it a transgender restroom, and then kept the men's restroom. And completely, it's just like, why? And you know how dirty men's restrooms are compared to women's restrooms in gas stations. It's night and day different, as it should be. Men are pretty disgusting creatures, but that's beside the point. And it's just something so small like that where you're really just taking away, and even just having biological men in locker rooms with little girls. And there's multiple cases. It just opens it up for stuff to happen when you hear about stories of transgender boys showing themselves off and doing the act in the locker room around the girls. Like, that should be a place where they can be together with other girls and feel safe and secure, because they're not being watched over their shoulder, or they're not having to worry about an attack or something that's going to happen, because a lot of these people in this situation are mentally ill, and that's off the numbers. As a father to a daughter, that hits me to my heart, and it was one of the biggest topics to me. And to some people who don't have children, it seems so small and irrelevant, but it was one of the biggest points to me when looking into this election and looking into what one side thought about the issue and what the other side thought about it. And the crazy thing is, too, that even half of Democrats agree that men should not be in women's sports. So there's a divide within the party there.
Yeah, man. It comes down to it. I mean, pretty much that's why it was so easy to get rid of it, because the only talking point that they ever had to even try to justify that is equality. And it's like, how is that equality? What about that situation is equal? And nothing about it is. So it doesn't make any sense that it was ever even a thing. And I mean, you have people even like Caitlyn Jenner, who has done that, and she doesn't agree with it.
Right.
Because it's fucked up. And I mean, Caitlyn Jenner has been on that shit for years, and arguably she's still damn near huge. Could definitely compete with men. Definitely would not be competing with women. So at the end of the day, it only makes sense, dude. And like you said, why get rid of the women's restroom? That's only opening it up for men to go in that restroom as well as ladies. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and like, once you open that door, if I want to have my little girl go in a women's restroom, and you've seen videos where the father has his little daughter walking around, he has to go in there and voice himself like she's coming in there, because there's just so many instances where weirdos are in there waiting in the stalls, and like the children could get assaulted and then just be too scared to say anything in the span of 30 seconds to a minute after coming out and talking to their parent. And there's a lot of videos where that happens, and you're encouraging that. And it's the same party that wanted to change the P word to minor attracted persons, and that's the same crowd. And like, I don't even want nothing to do with that. Keep that over there. You could take that to Epstein Island. You can die over there with it.
That's all you need to know about it right there. What you just said. The same people that think men competing in women's sports is okay is the same people that are voting for that to get changed to minor attracted persons, like you said. And that's all you need to hear. Delusional.
Exactly.
So, yeah, man, that's all you need to know. And that'll be enough on that one. So, next big pressing topic that seems to have been coming up in the last week is Trump is actually seeking information on those assassination attempts that were made on his life, which it makes you wonder, bro, this should have been done way before he was in office. This should have been done by the previous administration as soon as those actions took place. And what did they do following those attempts? Absolutely nothing. So, I mean, and it makes sense that he's going to be seeking information on it because he should. And there's got to be ties between them and all that. So that stuff should have been found out by this point. But I mean, we'll take getting the info now, but it's got to be gotten and figured out exactly why that happened to the best of their knowledge and how and everything else. So we'll see what that investigation ends up leading us to.
Yeah, and even after it happened, there was a lot of questions because, I mean, before the second one happened, the first one just seemed so coordinated, and the things he was able to do was just crazy that the shooter was able to prepare the way he did and was never spotted up until the point where he got on that sloped roof and was able to take a shot, a relatively easy shot in terms of someone who practiced like he did the range. What was it, 140 meters? That's not a hard shot at all. And then besides the shot, I mean, I see you have some notes here leading up. I mean, how was he even able to get to that sloped roof to begin with?
I mean, it's interesting, bro. Just to say this, he literally pretty much executed his plan exactly how Mark Wahlberg did in the movie Shooter. He literally showed up to the town, scoped everything out, had a rangefinder, had a drone, and was able to literally precisely plan that entire operation without somehow being noticed by anyone. How does that even happen in this age specifically when everybody's got phones and cameras and is videoing this and that constantly? Like, you're telling me that other people weren't in town for the speech and didn't see this guy fucking, range finding and everything else right around the podium? Like, how? It doesn't make any sense at all. But yeah, dude, I do have some notes on it. There was clear neglect from this situation from the jump, like we've already said.
Yeah, bro. The thing that I think the biggest thing is who were they talking to leading up to the event? And to come to find out that the first shooter had multiple phones, and he also had foreign-based encrypted email accounts, making it complicated for investigators to look into. It's just kind of like, okay, there was more of a motive on the first time, and like you said, the neglect, like to let him come to the area, have a rangefinder, have a drone, being able to scope out the area and go with a big bag to the sloped roof through all security. And it was even noticed by people at the rally who didn't get in and was on the side there by the building before police even were aware of them. So there's a lot of investigations that are coming out. People are wondering why the CIA and the FBI specifically just were so non-existent. And then when you look at the second attempt, that does seem more kind of random and unorganized, whereas the second shooter was a freedom fighter, has multiple donations to the Democratic Party. So just a hardcore Democrat and, the most radical of them all in the terms of being able to set up an AK-47 in a bush on a golf course. And luckily, someone doing a perimeter sweep was able to see his gun. That one seems a little less organized, so I don't know how much that one plays a part in conspiracy as much as the first one does, because just everything about this guy was just swept under the rug by the past administration, like you said, to be able to see just more info, because this doesn't happen very often. And when you're someone as controversial as Trump is, to tearing down the system of corruption that we're going to get into a little bit into the show, is, people with money and power is going to do anything to keep that money and power, whether that's us or, another nation that benefits off us not being the most powerful nation in the world. And I know a big thing that Trump had talked about and stated that there might be a connection to Iran in at least one of his attempts, but that's not anything other than speculation at this moment. No evidence has yet to be seen, so we do wait on that. But yeah, man, just to touch into kind of just the waste, like I don't know how much, like this is our show and the few people that watch and we're kind of the whole thing about our message is what impacts Americans, and people's biggest thing with politics is, oh, like it doesn't affect me, it doesn't affect me. But then you see all this stuff coming out about where our tax money's going, and people, no matter what party, have always bitched about taxes, rightfully so. You just see that FEMA and USAID is just throwing money anywhere they want to, with any extra being kicked back to politicians and missing. It really just fucking sucks.
Listen, I gotta tag this in before we go ahead and switch topics, bro, because like we talked about the negligence and the mystery and how it was just swept under the rug so quickly with the assassination attempts on Trump. Just because we just touched on this topic last week, bro, it's eerily similar to the JFK deal. how they do no investigations. They hardly know nothing, apparently, but then they just sweep it under the rug and it's on to the next story. And it comes out now that, which everybody sought this for a long time, but the government had their hands in the JFK deal. And that makes sense to why it got swept under the rug. They didn't have to do any investigations. They knew what happened. They knew exactly what happened. That's why they had to do no investigations. And now we got this deal with Trump where they did the same exact thing. There was 2 attempts on his life. Hardly, we got no information on them, and they swept them under the rug. It makes you think they already knew exactly why it happened, exactly what happened, and that's why it swept under the rug, and there was hardly no investigation.
Yeah, it's complete. Yeah, and just to see that the investigations, like you said, were just swept under the rug, and that they already came to conclusions while saying it was still being investigated. It's like, oh, well, we know these things, but we don't know about these things. It's like, okay, but then why are we coming to the conclusion outright that this was his motive? That, and it's saying that there's no clarity in it, and then, like you said, just pushing it to the side. It's like, okay,
Right.
you admitted there was no clarity, and then you're not even going to dig into it deeper, which that's expected from the last administration. They weren't digging into anything. And even you even see that, like, this Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, that's led by Elon and his crew, that they have faced a lot of scrutiny that they're stealing our information on social security numbers, which is just complete nonsense. It's their way of pushing fear, these media outlets. Elon's doing the job that Trump hired him for, and that's to show the corruption in the U.S. government on all these agencies that are showing that they're spending all these millions on stuff, our taxpayer dollars, and stuff that we would never, like, we have no voice in. And they're just pushing it with these 700-page bills. And you find out that even, when you look at the USAID, the Columbia Journalism Review just released that they had supported 6,200 journalists, 107 news outlets, and 279 media sector organizations in 30 different countries. 8.2 million to Politico, which was the news outlet that pushed the Russia hoax against Trump in 2016, that he was a Russian asset, which was proven to be false and was led by Kash Patel in the investigation of the new FBI director if he gets approved, hopefully. And just like other silly stuff, like the USAID spending 20 million on a Sesame Street show in Iran or Iraq, and this little bit of numbers I saw online, it said that the average taxpayers pay about 20K in taxes a year, and this the 20 million for that Sesame Street show was about the tax bill of 1,000 Americans. So when you hear Trump wanting to abolish the income tax, and then you find out there's hundreds and hundreds of millions and billions being wasted on these programs that none of us wanted, it's kind of bullshit that we are still paying an income tax. So I used to think it was a pipe dream that Trump would be able to get that past Congress, but you come to find out that all this money's been kicked around and misused, and Congress knew about it in a sense. They have no reason not to give us back our income tax. And that's what truly affects Americans. That's what is important to Americans, is like, how is it that we spend all this money on all these programs overseas, but teachers' salaries haven't really grown since the 70s? Fire departments, police are all losing, like, not having the funding for training and other resources, but we have all this money to send to other places. And I mean, it's a tale that's been, preached before the election and even during the election, but now it's even worse. And this is only just the beginning of what Doge has cracked into. I know you got some notes into what Doge has been getting into, so just let me know what you got.
Yeah, man, just to touch on the misuse of American funds right out the gate. A lot of people seem to be freaking out that Trump is moving a lot of power over to the states, but people need to realize, like you said, I mean, Congress has been getting lazy. They've been pushing these bills through that are hundreds of pages, not reading them all, and then not giving a fuck about where exactly all that money is going, and that's unacceptable. Everything gets pushed down to more of the state level. That changes everything because at the state level, the citizens have a lot more say in what goes on and what happens. So that's going to be huge for people, and people need to realize that and stop freaking out that more stuff's getting put to the states. The states should have more power. That just gives more power to the individual people. But yeah, I got some notes over here. Doge just today released that FEMA spent $59 million to house immigrants in luxury hotels in New York. I mean, that's absolutely insane. It makes sense with them being a sanctuary state or whatever it was. They were just letting anybody and everybody come there with no questions asked. And yeah, that's been a whole shit show. In October of 24, Biden's press secretary assured Americans that no FEMA funds were being diverted to illegals. Well, that just completely shots that out the window right there. And that's just one tiny example. There's already been multiple released prior about how that statement is completely false. Not just 59 million either, that we know that FEMA spent hundreds of millions on illegals over the last 4 years, and that's only one agency. And that's absolutely betrayal of the American people. That's lying about what they're doing with our money that we earn, we work for, and pay towards these states to make things better. And they're just sitting there fucking it off and doing whatever they want with it. That's unacceptable. That's got to stop. That's why I personally am 100% with Doge. I'm here for what it's doing. And I think at the end of the day, it's going to end up being a great thing for this country. But also, dude, just and the luxury hotels that they spent, dude, 59 million could build around at least 2,600 homes while hurricane victims are still living in tents.
Yeah.
Like how, dude? How is that what
Yeah.
our government has come to?
I agree. And FEMA, if you remember back then when the North Carolina hurricanes, all that happened, even the Maui wildfires in Hawaii, like FEMA just kept talking about, we don't have enough money. We don't have enough money. It's Congress's fault. It's the administration's fault. They didn't give us enough money.
Dude, and that just goes back to the whole Congress deal. Like I said, dude, and I've read multiple stories of them talking about how Congress passed these bills and did not even know what they were passing because they don't read them all through. I mean, at that point, it's almost got to be that they put a limit on how many pages can be passed with an individual bill. It shouldn't be 700 pages to pass one thing allegedly. That makes no sense, and that leaves way too much room for things to be falling through the cracks.
Yeah, and they've made it the new normal. That's just a normal thing in politics to make bills that large, and it's not. It's one thing they've continued to do, and they've made it the norm in the last 20 plus years. And when you just look at these numbers here, that the CBO just revealed that Congress spent 516 billion in 2024 on programs with expired authorizations, some dating back over 40 years. Despite rules against funding unauthorized programs, lawmakers ignored them, letting billions flow without updated approvals or oversight. So that's pure neglect there. You got to wonder, well, why did they turn their eyes in a different direction? And when you look at turn 51, more authorizations are set to expire this year, including 892 billion in defense spending. Yet Congress keeps writing these blank checks.
Pure negligence, bro. It's across the board. We're seeing it from, the far fucking situation over here to the furthest situation over here. There's just been neglect across the board. So we need a change, bro. And I think Doge is that. And it's going to shake out a lot of shit. And I think by the end of this 4 years, we're going to see our economy flowing and running on a completely different level than what we've seen in the last 25 years.
Yeah, and I think that's why some people are freaking out with no logic, is change is scary. And the media is really just throwing fuel on that fire. And that isn't governance from Congress. It's corruption. It's recklessly burning taxpayer money on programs they haven't even bothered to approve. And people are mad that Elon bought Twitter for 40 billion a while back, and people were outraged, like it was trending that he should have spent that money on world hunger. But you don't hear any of those people nowadays.
Right. I mean, like, where are those same people that are worried about what this man spends his money on that he worked for? But these same people have no thought in the world about where Congress is sending our money that we work for, that we pay to the government to make our country better. And nobody's talking about that. Nobody's worried about that. And it just shows you, bro. It just really shows you how many people just really don't have the care to do any real research. They themselves add fuel to whatever narrative big media is pushing, and they just keep it moving without doing any due diligence of their own. They just keep it on moving. And it's crazy to see, bro. But I think, like we've talked about before, now we're in the age of information, and it's only a matter of time before more people start waking up and stop drinking the Kool-Aid.
Yeah, and one thing that someone told me was they had seen these videos of these, older baby boomers, and they're like, I want every tax dollar I put in my whole life because this was not where I thought my money was going. And it's really a sad thing because we're young. Like we've been paying taxes for, little around a decade at this point, where people have been doing it for over 50 years. And just to find out this corruption, it's like I told you this analogy that it's like you were helping a family friend and you were giving them money and you were setting them up in great situations, and then they turn around and you find out that they've been stealing even more money from you and just completely defying your trust. And it's like so disheartening because it's like, man, this is not what I thought, this was going towards. But I will say there's a peace in it knowing that it's not going to happen anymore, and that you got to see the real side of it. And that's kind of what we're seeing now is, I mean, even when you hear about, we've been knowing about all the money they sent to Ukraine the last 4 years. And Zelenskyy, in an interview, the president of Ukraine, has said that out of the 200 billion estimate that we have sent Ukraine, he's only seen about 100 billion of it. So there's $100 billion just floating around that there's no account for. And when I say that we're getting into this is only FEMA and USAID. This is only 1% of the federal government. Like they have just begun to scratch the surface of this problem. Even now, you hear about them spending $10 million on creating transgender animals, rats and mice. They're talking about, well, it's 10 million out of, 200 million, 200 billion. It's that small percentage. Okay, just give me $10 million in. It's just a small percentage. I know that's crazy, but I mean, it's crazier to think that we're over here trying to create transgender rats.
Right, but I mean, even take that down to the smaller scale. If you go ahead and deposit $5,000 into any average American bank account, that's pretty much going to change their life. That might change the whole trajectory of how they end up as a person. And yet, like you said, we're just out here just throwing 10 million here, throwing 10 billion here, like left and right, and they're not even getting regulated on it at this point, with how they're just able to pass whatever they want and not even reading what they're passing, dude. It's just all got to change.
Yeah, and you see, like, after they had shut down the USAID headquarters and they had shut down the Department of Education, you have all these Democratic Congress people and representatives outside protesting, saying, why can't we get in there? This is the language they use when they're like, we're representatives trying to fight for your kids. We're trying to fight for disabled kids. It's like, okay, you're just trying to tug at my heartstrings right now because clearly you've been in this position way before this happened and you haven't been fighting for our kids. You haven't been fighting for advancements. And the kind of transition into that, shutting down the Department of Education, a lot of people just wonder, what does that look like? Because as a basic person, they kind of think, oh, well, does that end public schooling? And that's just not the case.
Yeah, 100%, dude. People need to realize that at the end of the day, this is going to be a win for education and a win for the parents who have kids in these school systems, dude, because it's not ending the funding for public schools by any means. And like teachers, it's not affecting their salaries. They're not paid by the federal government anyway. They're paid by state and local governments. So that whole worry is out the window, but that just all boils down to, again, people not doing their own due diligence. And just to throw this in there before we get too far away from it, dude, just want to give the flowers to the generations previous, because yes, they had to deal with all that poor handling of money and everything else, but at the end of the day, we're just getting into this renaissance of information. So they had no idea that the government was doing all this bullshit and everything, because all they knew was what mainstream media was pushing, because that's all they had. And that alone is crazy to think about. Like, what would it have been if smartphones didn't progress to where they are now and everybody wasn't making videos and talking about news and everything? We would still be in the same simulation of just listening to whatever the government's pushing down our throat, and that's all we could have.
Yeah, what were you telling me about that chick that went on the news? I think you said something. She was like the president of the American Federation of Teachers or something.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so basically, man, she accuses Trump of taking teacher salaries and giving them to billionaires by cutting the Department of Education. But, like I said, teachers are paid through local and state funding, not federal. So that's the president of the American Federation of Teachers spreading false information right there, dude. And you know that she knows that that's not affecting teacher salaries, but yet she's still going on there and speaking about it as if it is, just to cause panic. And it's like, for what? Why lie about that?
Yeah, and the crazy thing about the Department of Education, when it was created in 1979 by President Carter, he had turned around, and when that had happened, we were competing with the Soviet Union and Japan for the best statistics in math and science scoring in the whole world. And since then, since they established this Department of Education, we rank 34th in math and around 16th in science. And some of those science numbers, depending on how far you go into it, goes from like 16th to 30th. And what changed in 1979 was they created the Department of Education, and they thought they could basically take care of schools in small income areas on a federal level. But I would always think of the metaphorical sense of when you look at a classroom and you had like where we came from schools where you had a teacher with 30 to 35, 40 kids, he's not going to be able to focus on a certain handful of those kids like he would be able to if it was a classroom of 15 to 20. And being able to focus and not just have a blanket approach to teaching or even just funding and helping these programs, that's something that's important on the state level, like you said, pushing it back to the states, because how Texas runs their state is completely different than California on every level. So why would you put them in the same group when they have different views on a lot of fundamental issues, including education? So it's beautiful to see that that stuff is kind of is shutting down, because I think I saw a statistic, and I'm kind of roughhousing it here, but when you look at how much it was worth in the 70s, I think there were a little over $16 trillion was funded towards the Department of Education. Now it's over 200 trillion. And that's just unnecessary for the fact that our reading levels and our science levels have gotten way worse. Teacher salaries have stayed the same or gotten slightly worse, while administrations, executives, all the money we spend, I think it said that the average kid cost about average kid in 1970 was about 57,000 a head. Now it's about 164,000 a head, and we're not seeing any progress in that.
No, and honestly, you would more than likely say worse. I mean, school systems in general have gotten worse. I mean, this is no knock in teachers or anything like that, because I know the teachers are doing all they can, but like you said, you know, we're not getting more teachers. If anything, nobody's gonna go. You got to go to college to be a teacher. Nobody. It's hard to find people that are going to pay to go to college just to come out and be in debt and have a poor salary to where you're in student debt for the rest of your life. Why would people do that? So I mean, we're getting less teachers, we're getting more students, and that teacher to student ratio is only getting worse and worse. Well, like we talked about, dude, from that executives and everything going down, that Randy Weingarten or whatever makes over $500,000 a year, while the average teacher is only making 44,000. If you're going to advocate for the teachers, how about you maybe give up a little bit of your salary and help them out there?
Yeah, and you got to think the teachers are so sad because I think they said that the teacher convention is about 93% registered Democrats. So to
Right.
find out that you guys have been getting the short end of the stick of all this money that's going towards all education, they say, oh, put more money in education, put more money in education. Teachers aren't seeing it. The schools aren't seeing it. And like it just has to be taken in a state level because it can have more of a focus and they can really just be like, okay, this is how we're going to do these things here, and it's just like continued waste of spending, even in the Department of Education, where they spend 80 million on office space annually, despite requiring employees to be in the office only 2 days a week.
I agree. It's going to be interesting to see because, like you said, majority usually represent with Democrats. So it's going to be interesting to see that with the change coming now after all this time, how that might start to change. You got the Department of Education pretty much staying majority consistently blue and seeing no changes, no growth, no change to curriculum, no boost in teacher salaries, but with everything going back at the state level, that might all start to change. So it's going to be interesting to see how that ends up shaking out at the end of the 4 years.
Yeah, and then like to kind of speak on the protests that were going on outside of the Department of Education, you might have seen the security guy just doing his job out there while he's just getting just constantly yelled at and questioned by these representatives. And like I said, they were just talking about how Elon's the president now and they're letting them speak. The whole thing is there is a motive for these people to cover their tracks and where maybe they got to cover where their money's going to and what documents are in that building that they need to retrieve. And the big thing is too is like they're saying they're blocking members of Congress from entering the Department of Education. Elon is allowed in, but not the people. And it just that was the biggest thing is Trump asked him to do a job. And one thing about Elon is he knows how to run businesses. He knows how to cut the fat. And that is what Trump wants him to do. And Elon still follows what Trump says. Trump said anything. He does what I say. and he has a good team around him, and that's all that matters.
Yep, the majority of people voted for this. This was no secret. It's not like Trump got in office, pulled this out of his ass. This is a talking point that he had going through that entire election cycle. So the majority of people voted for this, dude. And we're getting exactly what we voted for. So, I mean, it really shows you the people that are mad and the people that are not, because, this is exactly what we voted for. I can't say it enough. He's shown time and time again, only in just a few weeks that he's been in office, that he's doing exactly what he said and exactly what majority voted for. So,
Yeah, and I would
shaking.
say consensus. Yeah, and I would say the consensus is, I mean, we've talked about it with people whenever you just talk about politics and the way of life. Like, education is not what it should be on the stuff that we've learned in high school. Like, the stuff that we were learning was not useful. There was stuff that was useful and you could apply to your life, of course, but there was a lot of stuff that we had to learn on our own, especially if we didn't have parents that were savvy in that field. And there's stuff we're still having to learn to this day, getting close to our 30s. And this is like important stuff, like tax stuff, like bank account, moving money, how to invest money. Like, they want to tell you to give your money to these investors and they'll get you a return while they make a bigger return. And that's good for you because you're putting money back in retirement when you can work that money yourself. And it's not that you should. Some people like the peace of mind of just putting the money away, but you should be able to have the option and the knowledge to make that decision yourself and not just be groomed into that decision of, oh, I need to park money here, and that be my only avenue going forward.
It's interesting, and I'm sure you can agree to this as well, because it makes you wonder. Like, I know I had teachers when I was in school that you could talk to them one on one, and you could get a different side of them. You could get them speaking differently about certain topics than what they do in the classroom. And it almost seemed like taboo at the time to, like, for them to go against the grain, to go against the curriculum. But I wonder how that's going to end up shaking out as well, because I feel like that's something huge. Like, they got that curriculum every year. They got to push that, push that, push that. And that's how it's always been. But that doesn't need to be the case, dude. Those teachers go through the schooling, get the education themselves. They should be able to, in a sense, run their classroom the way that they want to. And, they have the knowledge of taxes and all that stuff. So it'll be interesting to see how the curriculum changes with everything getting left up to the states.
Yeah, and I think it'll also just open up flexibility for homeschooling and, giving resource to that, because it's not a thing where one parent can stay at home and teach the curriculum of what they need to know for the SATs for that grade level leading up to that base of knowledge. You can't do that when both parents have to work 60 hours, and that you have to leave it up to the current education system. And it's not that all people should be homeschooled or all people shouldn't be homeschooled, but that was a consensus. If you're homeschooled, you're weird. That's not a normal thing. It's just very taboo, when in a sense it's because it's almost impossible to do it. So I think this administration might be able to open that up for parents that want to seek that. And I think that's the era that we're moving into is, you don't necessarily have to get your education through public school. If you live if you live out on the farm and your parents want to teach you how to work on the farm and you have your time on the laptop doing your curriculum stuff. And I think that's what's most important. And that will kind of keep it to the communities. And like you said, kicking it back to the states is kicking it back to the communities. And people are going to start paying attention more to local politics, which ain't even a thing to this day. People have started paying attention to national politics, but they're not paying attention to local politics. People don't even know the representatives in their own state or the numbers to call to back the bills that they want to back, and which people have the power to do as voters.
Yeah, and that's going to be huge, dude, like we've already talked about. And so many people are getting upset about things getting kicked back to the states, dude, but it's going to finally give people a voice. We don't have a voice on the national level. We vote that representative in every 4 years, and then we deal with what they say. So this is going to be huge. I'm all for, they can send as much things back to the states as they want. As far as I'm concerned, more things should be in the states' hands than are not, because that's the only way that the citizens actually get really a say.
Yeah, I agree. And it's just like you said, we're in the Renaissance, the age of information, and we're seeing all this corruption. And it's just beautiful to see because we're going to be able to see all the proof. And then with the tax code ending in June, July, we'll be able to write a whole new tax code with everything, with the tariffs being implemented, with all the money that's being saved. And people might actually, like, we're already going to see the no taxes on overtime, no taxes on tips. Like, we're really leading to a point where in 4 years, people will have more money in their pockets and they'll expect more in 2028. And that'll be a beautiful thing, too, because by then, 4 years more, people will be more entrenched in the information and will ask more questions, especially when you see the news media, the legacy media just get so crazy with their emotion based and race baiting that they're not even giving you logic anymore. Like it's the same loop around. And you can tell people who watch that stuff because they have the same talking points. And then when you question them on it, they deflect. Well, I'm just not that into it, or this, that, and the third. So I think we covered quite a bit on this show today. It was, going into next week, I think we're going to do a deep dive into COVID and how that looked like with the funding and the stuff that's came out about that. There was something today that's really more speculative. There's really no charges or files really out yet, but there is a chance that a Pennsylvania governor was involved in the assassination attempt on President Trump. So we'll have to get more info and research on that this week, as that just broke this morning. So wouldn't be responsible for us to kind of dive into that without any homework, as I'm seeing it's gaining more traction at this moment. But yeah, man, I mean, you got any finishing thoughts for the people?
I mean, I just think we're in a great time, man. Honestly, we're seeing the fall of legacy media before our eyes, and I don't say that's great because that opens up space for us. I say that's great because legacy media's whole purpose has been to push propaganda. So I think we're just in a great time. We're going to be in a time where we're going to finally start seeing more money in our bank accounts, where we're going to be seeing regulated government spending that's actually regulated, where we're going to see policies being able to be changed by the everyday American, where people are going to actually have more of a voice now. It's going to be a time where, people can be proud again, where people can feel like they need to be into politics because they actually do have a say, which I feel like has been a huge issue leading up to this time point. So I'm excited, man. The future is bright, as PPD says. So
Yeah, I agree. I always say, 70 years from now, we're going to talk about how pivotal the year 2025 was. You never know. It's like when you go through depression, you get out of it. You never really knew you were going through it until you're out of it. And you're like, man, I really was going through it. And I think that's kind of like what, ever since 2020, that's kind of what we've been in. And all this information has just been so much on us that 10 years from now, and our kids or grandkids are like, what was it like? If they give a shit. What was it like back then? When all this was happening, because with the way of life we have today is completely different than what it was pre 2020 or pre 2025. So these 5 years that we've had leading up to this moment, I think historical, and I'm excited to see how it plays out. But yeah, guys, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next week on some more topics, so make sure you tune in to the No Jerry Pod next week, week 4. Everybody have a good night.
yes, sir. Everybody take it easy. I appreciate you tuning in. We'll be back next week.